all games are not created equal. Okay. And when it's a big game, there's a heightened awareness that it's a big game. That game, like people were climbing on fences on like a Tuesday practice just to like watch us warm up.
Welcome to Beat Everyone. I am Ben Flanagan with AL.com. We are back yet again for another edition of our series, Alabama football's best 15 games of the 21st century. We are counting down from 15 to 1. We've done several of these already. It's been a ton of fun. You got to go back and listen to every episode so far. We've looked at some of the greatest games from the last 25 years, real true all-timers, national title games, SEC championships, instant classics, blowouts even, and we're going to talk about one of those today, as a matter of fact, but it's number 10 in the countdown. Our pick for the 10th best Alabama football game of the 21st century is Alabama versus Florida in 2005. Helping me to do this, as usual, Beat Everyone producer Matt Scalisi. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Ben. This is a momentous one, especially for us older millennial fans.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, we've also got a special treat for y'all today. Also joining us at various points of the show, someone who played a huge role in this game. The starting quarterback himself, Brodie Croyle, is going to take us behind the scenes and on the field to help us see it all through his eyes. So stay tuned for that. And we have an interview with Brodie Croyle we did earlier this week. You should go check that out on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Matt, you know, you just said it. For years now, we've been labeled as millennial dopes who are too obsessed with the Saban era, right? Like we're going a little further back this time to a time when Alabama was our team, right? Like we were in college at the University of Alabama. So, Matt, I have to ask, who were you and where were you in the fall of 2005?
Well, I was a rising senior. So it was my senior year of college, essentially, that I had 2 semesters left. And I had yet to see a decent Alabama football team, essentially, in my time in college. So the 2005 season, there was some hype going into it. I think anybody who cared about Alabama football at that point, you could not be blamed for refusing to buy into any hype around the team, because they had let us down. I mean, look, I'm not necessarily putting it on them, right? It had been a combination of factors over the previous 3 or 4 seasons that led to consistent disappointment. And some of those had nothing to do with coaching or even the talent level. Some of them had been because Brodie Croyle himself had been pretty injury prone. And he talked about that with us a little bit on the show earlier this week. I mean, he had terrible injury luck thus far in his college career. As promising as things had looked for him at times, the guy just got the crap kicked out of him year after year. And, you know, I think everybody felt very optimistic going into 2005, but there was always that caveat of, can Brodie stay healthy?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he got banged up a lot. He said 11 surgeries, I think, throughout his career while at Alabama. And you know, he played with some really talented offensive linemen individually. And at various points during the 2005 season, he was protected and he was able to do what he did best and stand in the pocket and make incredible throws. And then obviously some guys got injured during that season. And that's when he gets sacked 11 times against Auburn, as he discussed on our show. But I mean, he was a special player. It's so cool that he spent some time with us and opened up about this game in particular. Matt, we're going to go through categories like we usually do. We're going to hit the opening drive now. We talk about sort of what was happening at that point in the season, state of the program, touch on a few key storylines heading into it. Matt, you know, this was October 1st, 2005. It was Alabama's 5th game of the season, their 4th home game. They were undefeated at this point with wins against Middle Tennessee State, Southern Miss, South Carolina, and Arkansas. I mean, Shula, you know, he was trying to sort of prove himself as the head coach of Alabama against all the adversity that he and the team had faced. He had assembled quite a squad at this point, but he was 1-8 against ranked opponents in his career coming into this game. His only win against Southern Miss in 2005. So it's been a struggle for him so far, but things are starting out well.
Yes, and I if I'm not mistaken, I believe the South Carolina game that season was what was known in the fan base and in the discourse as Shula's signature win. That was the phrase that was associated with it. Because and the reason that that was said is because he had not had a win that you could point to and say that one's kind of a big deal. Like I'm not talking about the game that we're about to get into. I mean, there wasn't even a win that you could say, all right, they finally beat somebody decent. Like it just hadn't happened yet. And so you could feel the sort of hunger and the momentum building a little bit, starting, I think, with that South Carolina game where people were saying, all right, this Alabama team is maybe actually good enough to beat some good teams.
It was a 2:30 p.m. kick in Bryant-Denny Stadium. Matt, CBS broadcast the game. Vern Lundquist on the call with Todd Blackledge, Tracy Wolfson on the sideline. Matt, so like what everybody remembers about this is where I want to start. I want to start with the atmosphere of the game. A lot of people our age or who were just there to witness the game, they still to this day insist it was among the loudest days ever inside Bryant-Denny Stadium. I actually missed this live. I watched it on TV from my then girlfriend and now wife's apartment. Matt, were you in the building for this game?
I was. I had actually just started getting into sports journalism at the Crimson White, the student paper, but I had not moved up the ranks enough to merit a press box seat for this game, but I did have student tickets. And so I was at this game. I actually recall that along with some of my friends, I ended up sitting in the middle of a large group of Alabama gymnasts, like the gymnastics team. And many of whom I was passingly familiar with because I have covered gymnastics as a sports reporter for the CW. So it was a very Bama athletics experience for me. I was kind of in the middle of other UA athletes.
And how did you focus on the game?
Yeah, but I mean, all week building up to that, I can just remember saying to people, this one feels different. Like the level of hype coming into this game is different. It had been circled on our calendars, I guess, from preseason for a while for a number of reasons. Like I think a big part of it too was that Urban Meyer was the new kid on the block, and there was this feeling of like he's maybe a hot shot and he's got some tricks up his sleeve, but he's not ready for the SEC yet. And I think that was an element of it. And I think again, Alabama fans simply hadn't seen a team that didn't have so many things going wrong for it that they couldn't be competitive in kind of a long time. And the RVs were there early. I remember that being part of the detail. I can remember being at the Arby's on on University and saying, okay, well, the RVs are rolling past us right now.
Like, big pregame for you at Arby's, huh?
This was no, I'm talking about like this was like Tuesday, Wednesday. That I can remember being at the edge of campus and seeing the RVs. Like,
okay, so just like a midweek meal.
Oh yeah,
hyping yourself up. Okay, eating Arby's ahead of time. Didn't feel good about it.
Yeah.
No, it was huge. I mean, and you're right. Like you hear it in college football and sports all the time. Like we're really going to learn something about this team this game, right? Like this was really one of those litmus tests for not just Alabama, the 2005 team, but for Mike Shula and his coaching tenure, for Alabama, the program, after overcoming what it had at that point. But for more on what it was really like from someone who actually lived it from the field, here is former Alabama quarterback Brodie Croyle.
Yes, it was the most electric field I've ever stepped on. Like I'm talking, you could feel it that week because, I think it was being dubbed the biggest game that's ever been played at Bryant-Denny at that time. And, everybody, here's the thing about players and coaches and even active players would probably disagree with me. Maybe active coaches would for sure disagree with me. But all games are not created equal, okay? And when it's a big game, there's a heightened awareness that it's a big game. That game like people were climbing on fences on like a Tuesday practice just to like watch us warm up. Like the RV park was full by Wednesday. Like I mean, you knew it. You try to go to class and like man, it was just. And when you stepped out of that tunnel for the first time in pregame and the entire deal is just filled up and people erupt just by you walking out, like you go, it's different. And even at that point in time, though, you go, I feel like we're going to have a really good game. But that's the awesome part about sports is, especially football, like everything has to come together. 11 guys have to be doing their job in the right moment for everything to work. Every phase of the game has to be clicking on the same day for you to be able to win a game like that. And so there's still that unknown that I know I'm prepared, but what's going to happen next.
Matt, names like Freddie Roach, Baron Huber, Jimmy Johns, Ramsey Robinson, Juwan Simpsons. I mean, real ones are going to remember this one, Matt. Like Brodie Croyle, though, like we had him on. I didn't want to embarrass the guy too much by talking to him about his accomplishments and really his status at the time. But he was a big deal when he was the starting quarterback at Alabama. Obviously, you've had names like Tua Tagovailoa, Jalen Hurts, Mac Jones, Jalen Milroe, who just got drafted in the NFL draft. But Brodie Croyle was like the man at the time. He was a third-year starting quarterback for Alabama. What do you remember about who Brodie Croyle was at the time?
As close as we could have gotten to a cult-like figure in Alabama football for a while there. And I think, it goes back to sort of the start of his story. I mean, he was a heralded recruit, and he was a home state guy. And Alabama didn't always get those guys. I mean, those quarterbacks that had any kind of real strong reputation as a recruit, a lot of them had been leaving the state. A lot of them had been going to Auburn. But Brodie, as he discussed with us, it was important for him to play for Alabama. It meant something to him because of his family history. And, I think that seeing those flashes of talent from him when he was healthy in his earlier seasons, people believed in the guy. People really felt like if he can just stay upright, this is the guy that can lead us back to national prominence or even relevance. And so that faith in a quarterback, it was pretty rare for Alabama football at the time. So I think there was a special aura around him just because of the faith in his talent.
Yeah, I mean, this was the first time in a long time where it seemed like everything went through the quarterback. The team was defined by his success. But, to understand this game and really this season, like you've got to really go back a couple of years. You've got to relive some of the turmoil created by a coaching carousel that no one could have ever hoped to predict. After the 2002 season, Dennis Franchione left Alabama for Texas A&M. Alabama then hired Mike Price away from Washington State. He comes in, and there's really a ton of excitement, Matt, like especially from Brodie Croyle and the players who think that Price's pass-heavy offense is going to change sort of the identity, the trajectory of the program, and then huge scandal hits. I mean, a lot of people know the story. Price is fired. Matt, we probably won't talk about him again during this series. What do you remember about Mike Price?
Well, I mean, not much because he wasn't around very long. But I was at the spring game. The only time he actually sort of appeared in that capacity as the Alabama head coach. I think people were excited for something different. I think there was a real desire to move past the bitterness and the negativity of the NCAA sanctions. And I think, unfortunately, Dennis Franchione's departure delayed that from happening. It sort of was like another punch in the gut on top of the hit from the sanctions. And people just felt like, look, if we could just stop the avalanche of bad stuff happening to us, it's not going to take that much to get this program back on its feet again. And I mean, maybe that was the more optimistic of the fans, but I think 2005 bore that out a little bit. It was the first time, at least up to this point, there was not serious major injury issues thus far hampering the team. There weren't I mean, there were still lagging effects of the sanctions, you could say, but they weren't directly impacting the team anymore. They had sort of a full complement of talent. And a coaching staff that had their feet under them. They had actually had the chance to work with some of these players for multiple years, get everybody kind of used to a system. And so this was the first time it felt like Alabama was on a relatively level playing field for a while.
I remember being disappointed, obviously, in what Mike Price did in terms of the result that it led to, right? And I was disappointed that he got dismissed. I like everybody else, I wanted to see what would happen with him as head coach, how Brodie Croyle and these other incredible offensive players would flourish in his system. But it was so interesting because you remember there was a public press conference where they announced
I do,
his
yeah.
dismissal, and Brodie Croyle and Shad Williams and I think Wesley Britt, maybe I could be getting that fact wrong. They got on stage and pleaded and appealed for Robert Witt to keep and give Mike Price another chance.
Yeah, here's a real dark memory I have from that time, Ben, is that press conference was happening. If people are familiar with the Birmingham Racecourse, which is a defunct horse racing track that you are allowed to bet on horse races even remotely from there. I was there to place my bet on the Kentucky Derby that day when that press conference was happening. And I just remember being, look, it's not a well kept up place. It's not a particularly bright place to be. And I just remember looking up at the TVs and seeing, Brodie in tears. And it was a weird moment. It just felt like nothing could go right. It felt like Alabama was cursed.
Yeah, and you mentioned the sanctions, right? I mean, this included a 2-year bowl ban. It included a reduction of 21 football scholarships over 3 years. It put them on probation for 5 years. So it was really bad, and it could have been worse, Matt. I mean, at this point, once Price is gone, nobody wants to coach at Alabama, and in comes Mike Shula, who doesn't even get a spring camp, right? Because Mike Price handled that. Croyle starts every game in 2003. He battled through injuries. They finished 4-9. In 2004, Croyle is healthy. He's back for his junior season. He really explodes out of the gate. He's having a great year. They dominate Utah State and Ole Miss, and then he tears his ACL in a 52-0 win over Western Carolina. So the season is over. They finish 6-6. That brings us to the 2005 season. Matt Croyle rehabs in the offseason. He's back for another season after overcoming a devastating injury. Despite the limited number of scholarships, Shula has recruited well. The players are developing. They're buying in. They have leaders like Croyle and Tyrone Prothrow at wide receiver. On offense, they've got D'Amico Ryans and Roman Harper on defense. They look really impressive in their first 4 games. They beat Middle Tennessee State, Southern Miss, South Carolina, Arkansas, as I mentioned. Matt, what do you remember about this Alabama team who is ranked 15th heading into the Florida game?
Well, I mean, I remember Ken Darby was a real, genuine, reliable star at running back. It's hard for people who aren't familiar with Darby. I think it's hard to find an immediate parallel, but I mean, not that dissimilar from I think sort of the Josh Jacobs, Mark Ingram basic type of running back that had a lot of power, a lot of strength, and was great at making that one crucial cut in the backfield after getting the ball that would sometimes open up big things for him. He was also pretty talented catching the ball out of the backfield, which was particularly helpful when you had a guy like Brodie Croyle, who could actually sling it around a little bit. But in general, a lot of depth at running back. You mentioned Jimmy Johns earlier, who was still a running back at this point, but also they had multiple fullbacks, which that's really going to date this team for you. That there was more than one fullback on the team that you knew their name if you were a fan of the team. You had Tim Castile and LaRon McClain, 2 guys who were just excellent blockers, essentially tight ends back there, blocking tight ends. And they were very, very good at what they did. And in particular, LaRon McClain, I think you'll see have a pretty big impact on this game. He had 3 receptions in this game, one of them a 20-yard play. So I mean, this was a very talented offense outside even of just Brodie Croyle. I mean, and Tyrone Prothrow was obviously a star on the team, but you had some sort of rising stars, I guess, elsewhere on the offense. And Keith Brown was one of those guys who would have to step up later in the season, but was already showing himself to be kind of a star here too.
Yeah, McClain and Castile's true like homegrown Alabama players, right? LaRon McClain, he played at Tuscaloosa County High School here where I am and where I grew up. He's the same age as me. Actually, Tim Castile, obviously the son of Jeremiah Castile, so Alabama football lineage there. So it was really cool to watch them play for Alabama. So we have established Bryant-Denny Stadium is on fire. A ton of hype going into this game. The place is rocking, so much so that Florida is rattled on the first possession. It's 3 and out for Chris Leak, and they punt, and then Prothrow actually fumbles the return back to Florida around midfield, but then Florida goes 3 and out again. Alabama's defense is fired up, and then Alabama gets the ball at the 13-yard line, and all they need is one play, Matt. Here's Brodie Croyle again.
And that Prothrow play, that's the most asked play that anybody ever asked me about. It's like, man, what was that like? I said, it's both the loudest I've ever heard the stadium and it's the quietest I've ever heard the stadium all at the same time. And they're talking about the first play of the game. And I said, and it's the quietest because there was about a 3-second span where I released the ball that the 100,000 people go quiet. And as the quarterback, when you throw it, you know if it's about to be right or not. And when you throw a perfect ball, you know it's perfect from the moment it leaves your fingers. So there's a 3-second span of my life that I'll remember forever. And it was that, because I knew it was right. I knew it was perfect. And here's the funny part, is that was the 8th time we had run it that week. People always talk about it, and they always love to say that. And they were like, what was it like? I said, well, it's the 8th time I completed it that week. And there's a whole concept there of like, man, practice relieves pressure, because you know it's about to be a big moment. But if you have rehearsed something long enough, when the moment comes, the moment doesn't overtake you. And that was one of those moments for us, because we knew what we had in that play. And it went deathly silent. And it's like you're just waiting for it. When he called it, it's one of those that you don't know what to do. Like, we're 87 yards away. I guess where I was throwing it, I was probably almost 100 yards away from, where I was going to end up celebrating with the receiver. And I don't know if you remember or not, all I knew to do was put my hands in there and I started spinning. All my teammates made fun of me, and my mother afterwards, she got teary-eyed talking about it. It's like, what was I doing? She said, baby, when you were a baby, like when you were little, and she said, you would get excited. You would stick your fingers out and you would just start spinning in circles. And she said, it's what you reverted to.
Wow.
So, man, it was such a neat game. It was one of those games we could have played anybody and won. Like, just everything was working.
Okay, so Prothrow goes the distance, an electrifying 87-yard touchdown. We know Florida's in trouble at this point. They get the ball again on their own 17. Leak throws a pass that's tipped and then intercepted by Chris Harris. And Matt, I want to selfishly shout out that Chris Harris went to Central High School in Tuscaloosa, my alma mater. I was classmates with his sister, Erin, actually. Shout out to her. I played Little League Baseball with this guy, and this dude was like 6'6" in the 9th grade, Matt. I mean, this dude was just a freak athlete, found his way onto the field, made a huge play in the biggest game of his life. So go Falcons. I digress, Matt. They hand it to Tim Castile. He scores a touchdown, and you just explained the backfield with Darby, Castile, and McClain in short yardage situations. They were pretty unstoppable, actually. But Matt, Darby had 15 carries for 100 yards plus. Following him with 8 carries, most of it in garbage time, Jimmy Johns at running back. Matt, quickly, what do you remember about Jimmy Johns?
Well, a long story that you can look up online if you want to.
That's a whole other podcast.
But yeah, I mean, look, at the time, a very heralded recruit. I believe he was Mr. Football in the state of Mississippi. A lot of excitement about that guy because he was one of those do-it-all athletes. He was he was the type of guy who played quarterback for his high school team just because he was the most talented guy on the team by far. And they just wanted to have the ball in his hands every single play. But he came to Alabama, um, you know, initially as a running back. I think he maybe did get some practice reps at quarterback. He was on the kickoff coverage team. He eventually would migrate his way into being kind of a defensive specialist, but just a level of athlete that honestly Alabama didn't frequently get on their roster in the Shula era. Just a tremendously talented guy, and absolutely loved Alabama. Whenever he would talk about Alabama, the passion this dude would speak with. I mean, he would talk about how he wants his grandkids to go to Alabama, his non-existent grandkids. This was just a dyed in the wool Gump all the way.
Yeah, and it's an amazing story, like you said, and hopefully we'll be able to tell a little bit more of it on future episodes of the podcast. And, honestly, if you just go back and watch the game, offensive coordinator Dave Rader has so many impressive, often ambitious calls and really challenging situations where, the team is backed up in their own territory at times, and he finds them a little breathing room. Croyle, like I said, is protected for much of this game, and he executes it really well. So Rader deserves a lot of love for this one. But, man, Matt, how about defensive coordinator Joe Kynes? I mean, he's got a squad. I mean, we mentioned D'Amico Ryans, Roman Harper, guys like Freddie Roach, Juwan Simpson, Mark Anderson was an underrated defensive end at Alabama, Anthony Madison in the backfield. I mean, Charlie Pepra, just really solid players. I mean, this was a talented group, and Joe Kynes kind of became a fan favorite for his old school approach and his gregarious personality. And America kind of saw that, what kind of a character he was when he was the interim coach in Alabama's bowl game the next year against Oklahoma State with a what has become a viral halftime interview. Matt, what do you remember about Joe Kynes?
I mean, Kynes was obviously a guy that we loved in the press corps because he was very unique in his character and in his voice. But he was, like you said, Ben, I think he was beyond just being a guy who understood the basics of football defense. I think guys loved to play for him. I think he had really underrated leadership skills as a coach. And part of how I think he was able to do that is he would, it was a lot of positive reinforcement. When a guy was doing something right, Kynes would absolutely pour love on the guy. And it wasn't always about being the most talented. Kynes loved to hold up as examples guys who were always where they were supposed to be, not necessarily the guys that made the big spectacular athletic plays. And I think building up over years, 2005 was the kind of team that I think you're not going to see as much of in the future in the NIL and transfer portal era. This was a team that they had been building towards. These are a group of guys that had chemistry because they'd been playing together and playing for the same coaching staff for years in a row. And, I think at the time, by the time you arrive at this season, you've got a group of experienced players who like each other, who like their coach, and who understand what their jobs are. And, this was always going to be a pretty good season for Alabama, I think. And I think there was always going to be a little bit of a drop off after this. And that's just sort of how football used to work.
Yeah. The defense and Kynes had a lot to do with it. They gave Alabama chances to win and compete even during some of those darker days before this 2005 season. But I had when I would go to games in Bryant-Denny Stadium, sometimes I'd be sitting in seats, and this fan who had lifetime season tickets, he would always scream at whoever the coordinators were. It didn't matter who they, as if they could hear him, like when he was upset with the way the offense or the defense was playing, and he would always scream, "Kynes, Kynes, get him right, Kynes." And it would be like Carl Torbush. We used to call the guy Torbush because he used to go in on Carl Torbush all the time. But Kynes, that's one reason the name's going to be burned into my brain, not just for that viral interview that I mentioned. So, Matt, the next category we have is called the kill shot. This is obviously the play that effectively sealed the victory. Matt, honestly, to me, this kind of felt like that first play to Prothrow was kind of the tone setter. It ultimately gave Alabama all the momentum, all the confidence that they needed to win this. But Brodie Croyle, he's back with us. He picked another play a little later in the game where he pretty much knew it was a done deal. I've heard you say that during practice, it just seemed like you knew that you could do whatever you wanted that week. Like you said, like we could just beat anybody, whoever we're going to play. When did you know the game was over? Whether it was the week leading up or it was on that play, like when did you know it's over? We're in control here.
That's a good question. I'll tell you, when we hit Keith Brown on that slant, I went, because up to that point, you're just kind of waiting on Florida to be Florida. And when we hit that and he took off, it was one of those, we're about to mud hole stomp these guys. And then I think that took us from 14-3 to 21-3, if I remember correctly. And that's not enough. I mean, I've lost games where we were up by 21. We lost Arkansas my sophomore year. We were up by 21. They came storming back. They had Matt Jones as their quarterback. We just couldn't tackle him. And so 21-3 was not the, oh my goodness, we're going to win. 21-3 was, we can do anything we want. We're about to pour this on pretty strong here over the next couple quarters. And we did. Our defense played incredible that game. But it's kind of always fun to beat the bully too. And there had been a lot of noise coming from Florida that week. And so you hear it, you know it, and you hate to say it's extra motivation, because it's not. You're going to prepare the way that you're going to prepare, but when it's said and done, you appreciate them a little bit more. That's probably the best way to say them.
So in another one-play scoring drive, they go up 24-3, Matt. In the second quarter, it's a 65-yard slant to Keith Brown, who just leaves Florida in the dust, and it's clearly over. But they're not done. They continue to seal it with a pretty healthy dose of Ken Darby, as you've mentioned, down the stretch. Then a 15-yard touchdown pass from Croyle to Prothrow, and then we have our final score, 31-3. So this game, unfortunately, takes a turn at this point, and it becomes the definition of bittersweet. And with just 9 minutes left in the game, Alabama's in 4-down territory. It's 4th and 5, and they figure, why not? I think at this point, starters are still in the game. They want to pile it on Florida. Croyle pump fakes as the pocket begins to collapse. Prothrow is open. He lets it fly. Prothrow jumps to catch it, and then he comes down, and unfortunately, he breaks his lower leg in the end zone in what is really just a gruesome moment. It's one of those where you don't even want to show the replay if you're the broadcast, and it's a season-defining moment because they obviously lose Prothrow for the rest of the year, but it becomes a big what-if for the remainder of an otherwise successful season. But more importantly, Matt, it's a career-ending injury and something that will ultimately impact his life moving forward. Matt, Prothrow, he's from Heflin, Alabama. He played at Cleveland County High School before coming to Alabama, where he was an all SEC caliber wide receiver, all-purpose player. He won an ESPY for this insane acrobatic catch against Southern Miss that everybody remembers. It's a Daniel Moore painting. I mean, it went viral before things went viral, but he had multiple surgeries after the injury. He was placed on medical hardship scholarship. He was taken off the roster once Nick Saban became head coach. He would go on to have a career in business. Even did some coaching and has done coaching at several different places since then. And, he was a plaintiff in the O'Bannon versus NCAA antitrust lawsuit against the NCAA that went to trial in 2014. So Prothrow has been still part of sort of the college football zeitgeist and story for many years since that injury in 2005. And Matt, we're going to hear a little bit more from Brodie Croyle on Tyrone Prothrow right now. Let's hear from Brodie.
But it's a lot like a lot of things. It's one of the best memories of your life, and at the same point in time, it's one of my favorite teammates, probably the best athlete I've ever played with. His entire career was derailed, just a few short hours later. And so, you have the highest of highs, and then you have the lowest of lows, just due to the pain that you feel for just a great teammate in Tyrone Prothrow. And just still one of the most infectious smiles you'll ever be around. And probably, I said the best athlete. He also is probably the toughest guy I ever played with. Like, man, if you've ever seen him, he's smaller than you think he is. And he wasn't. I mean, he was very fit, but he wasn't like overly big. But man, he just had the heart of a lion, and that was a hard way to end that game.
All right, Matt. Let's name the MVP. Who won the game? This is, again, usually a player, can be a coach, broadcaster, anybody who sort of like left their footprint on this game. The person we remember the most years later. Matt, who is your MVP of Alabama, Florida, 2005?
You know, I'm actually going to go with Joe Kynes, who we talked about earlier. I think this was just such a tremendous defensive effort, and it took the life out of this Florida team that had some hype, you know, going into this game. They were number 5 in the country. They were the talk of college football because they were representing the new wave of spread option offense. And I mean, Joe Kynes had the perfect plan put together for them. They couldn't do anything in the first half. And then by the time you get to halftime, Ben, they don't even punt in the second half. The second half of drives for Florida in this game end with turnover on downs, interception, turnover on downs, end of game. They are so far behind. They're so lifeless that they're not even bothering to sort of try to keep themselves in the game with punts. And I think there was, I mean, you can, when you watch the broadcast, there's so much frustration for Chris Leak, who obviously would go on to be a very, very good college player and win a national championship. But I think I think Alabama caught him at the right time. That I don't mean to diminish this accomplishment, but I think as excited as everybody was about this Florida team and as pumped as they were going into this game, you know, there was a lot to that offense, and they weren't familiar with it yet. And I think Joe Kynes read their weak points perfectly. I think he saw the gaps in their understanding of the offense that they were running, and he took advantage of them perfectly. And I think he had the trust of his players that when he gave them this plan, which was pretty aggressive, that they went out there and they did it, and they trusted each other and they trusted him. And the amount of, it can't be said enough. And the reason this game is where it is on our countdown is because this reestablished Alabama as a team that should be taken seriously when they play an elite program in college football. They really weren't before this. They were as pretty close to an automatic win if you had Alabama on your schedule in 2003, 2004. But after this game, people were scared of them again. And they had the right to be. And, look, obviously they didn't win every game in 2005, but even the games they lost, they were competitive, and they were a program to be taken seriously again.
Yeah, it's a great point. And Kynes is a really good pick for this because, I mean, you've got this new spread offense that is emerging soon. It's going to change college football, and Urban Meyer is going to be a multinational champion at Florida. And like you said, Chris Leak is a really talented quarterback, and they hold them to 3 points, and they just couldn't do a thing. So I really like the pick a lot. And those players, man, D'Amico Ryans, Roman Harper, those guys are so fun to watch. And they obviously went on to have successful NFL careers. D'Amico Ryan's obviously a successful head coach in the NFL now. But, I'll stick to the other side of the ball. For me, it's either Prothrow or Croyle. I mean, Prothrow has 5 catches, 134 yards, 2 touchdowns. They just can't stop him. He leaves his mark on a defining game for the program. You think of him as soon as anyone mentions this game because of the stats, and then obviously because of the injury. So he's a worthy pick for me. And then Brodie Croyle, he goes 14 of 17 for 283 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Just a monster game when they needed it most from him. I mean, it was just peak Brodie Croyle, the player that everybody expected him to be. It just happened that Saturday in October in Tuscaloosa. So we get to the takeaways, Matt. Like, what were the consequences? Does the game look any different with the benefit of history? Matt, this is a game that a lot of Alabama fans, especially geriatric millennials like ourselves, we really hold on to it as a high point of not just the Shula years, but really of that stretch of what many consider a kind of limbo for Alabama between 1992 and 2009, those national championship seasons. They were ranked as high as 4th in the country during the 2005 season. I mean, this was Alabama back in the national spotlight again after this neck deep situation and NCAA sanctions, coaching controversies, general mediocrity that Alabama fans weren't used to. They didn't like, obviously. They beat a top 5 team convincingly. They reestablished themselves as real contenders with the team talented enough, maybe to even win a championship. You never know. Shula had just seemingly put it all together despite all of this adversity. And it was really this game that sort of defined that momentary belief that Alabama had something special again.
Yeah, it raised the floor for the program. And I think, this game has become over the years so much bigger than just the 2005 season. And I think as we talked about, the Prothrow injury in this game was very deflating within that season. And obviously it's a big deal for anybody to have a career ending injury. That's heartbreaking. It's awful. I don't think we should say that because of it, that Prothrow didn't contribute in a huge way to the program getting back to the top. I truly do think that this game made Alabama fans care and believe in a different way again. I think Nick Saban doesn't happen at Alabama if you don't have the belief and the enthusiasm from the fan base. And I think those things were reignited in a very important way in this game. I mean, the Bama's back cover from Sports Illustrated was not just a gimmick from national media buying it. This was not TCU has run their way through the Big 12, and isn't that cute that they're going to be in the playoffs? This was one of the titans of college football finally looking like they had a pulse again, and the level of enthusiasm that immediately was ejected from the fan base because of that was palpable. I mean, we talked about that moment, that first touchdown from Brodie to Prothrow in this game. People call it the loudest moment in Bryant-Denny Stadium history because in part because it hadn't been loud for a long time. Not like that. It was the outpouring of a bunch of people waiting to see if this team could ever make them feel that way again. And as soon as it did, it was like, watch out. The engines are lit again on this machine. And I do really think that was the first taste that the Bama fan base had again, that showed them what it could be like if we just put our money, our resources, our passion into this program again. This is what it can feel like. We can blow out top 5 teams. And um I look, it's a big what if game. I don't think what followed would have followed necessarily without a moment like this.
Yeah, you mentioned the Sports Illustrated cover. Brody Croyle's on the cover throwing a pass against Florida. The text says Bama is back, printed across the front. Under it, the unbeaten Crimson Tide rolls over Florida for a feature written by Mark Beach. Matt, I mean, for those who don't remember what magazines are, let alone what a Sports Illustrated cover signified at the time, like help people understand, like why was being on the cover of Sports Illustrated so important, especially at this time for Alabama football and the fans?
I can't explain anything to Gen Z kids, Ben, because there's no equivalent. Because there's nothing that y'all all pay attention to anymore. I mean, I don't know what I'd say. It would be like, oh, this is like if Bama football was in the Minecraft movie or something.
Yeah, or like it'd be like if they showed up on the For You page on TikTok or Instagram.
This is from a time when being the focus of national media attention meant something.
Yeah.
And Alabama fans did care what the national media said about them. It was a form of validation for the program. And it meant something to us every time Alabama was in the Sports Center top 10. You would call your friends and be like, "Hey, we're on Sports Center. They put our team in the top 10 tonight." It was a big deal. And being on the cover of Sports Illustrated, it was like someone had taken the time to mark this as a historically important moment. And again, I think the confidence that you get from that, the excitement you get, can't be substituted. And you can't have great college athletics unless your fan base cares a whole lot. And Alabama fans really cared again after this game.
Well, so they lose Prothrow, Matt, and they keep on winning if you just want to look at the rest of the season. In fact, they win their next 4 games. They beat Ole Miss, Tennessee, Utah State, Mississippi State. They're nowhere near as explosive as they were with Prothrow, but they stay undefeated, and they have this massive SEC showdown against LSU. It's in Bryant-Denny Stadium. I was at that game. They lose 16-13 in overtime. It's a great game, but after losing starting center J.B. Klausner, they're just banged up. Then they get to the Iron Bowl. Brodie Croyle is just he's just sacked 11 times. They lose by 10. So what feels like a dream season has a really rough finish. They beat Texas Tech in the Cotton Bowl 13-10. They finished the season 10-2. They're 8th in the AP poll. They go 6-2 in the SEC. Unfortunately, all the wins would have to be vacated due to the textbook scandal that would be found out just a couple of years later.
We don't worry about that on this show.
Well, that's right. The next year they start 5-2, but they lose 4 of their next 5 games. They finish the regular season 6-6, and Shula is fired after the Iron Bowl. They lose to Oklahoma State in the Independence Bowl. They finish 6-7 overall. Then they hire their next coach, Matt. We don't have to get into that detail right now, but Shula goes on to some assistant coaching stints in the NFL for teams like the Jacksonville Jaguars. He was the quarterback's coach and then the offensive coordinator for the Carolina Panthers, including the year Cam Newton won MVP when the Panthers made the Super Bowl. He worked for the New York Giants, the Denver Broncos, the Buffalo Bills, and then now he's the offensive coordinator at South Carolina under Shane Beamer, and he will host his former Alabama Crimson Tide team this year in 2025. Otherwise, Brodie Croyle gets drafted to the Kansas City Chiefs in the 3rd round. He served as a backup and also started several games, kept battling injuries, ultimately retired in 2012, now is the CEO, executive director of Big Oak Ranch in Alabama. So a lot leading up to it to set the table, and then obviously a lot in the aftermath. And it's just crazy to think, Matt, that they were just 3 years away from, not 2 years away from Saban's first season, but really like 3 years away from that 2008 season when they just reestablished Alabama as not only a contender, but another future dynasty. So I bet if you go back to 2005 and you tell everybody in that stadium that this is what's on the way, you assume, yeah, because Mike Shula's still here and Brodie Croyle's won the Heisman and they're national champs, but it obviously took a different turn.
You joke, but I mean, I think the seeds were there, and without going into the long stretch of it, I mean, 2005 leads to things like Andre Smith signing with Alabama, a 5-star player, something that really had never happened for Alabama. Andre Smith is a huge part of that 2008 team that turned everything around for Alabama. And I'll direct everybody to on the same channel that you're watching this on YouTube, the Turning of the Tide documentary about that 2008 season. Really, really well done piece by Laura Goldman at AL.com, but a great documentary that goes really in depth about that 2008 team. I think the seeds for all of that were planted in this 2005 season.
Yeah, and another Laura Goldman documentary where you and I are featured, Matt, is the Shula years, where we and others talk about what it was like to watch the Shula era while students at the University of Alabama. And the whole idea behind that piece is sort of to ask the question, was Mike Shula taken for granted as the Alabama coach? He had ups and downs, and most people remember the downs, and they wouldn't trade what happened after he was fired for anything. Obviously, nobody would, but just considering when he took the job, the way he managed to recruit, the tone that he established, the fact that he got buy-in from all these amazing players, the fact that he had a successful season like this where they nearly got there, Shula was successful, I think.
There's zero question that he left the program in better shape than he found it in.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, Matt, this was fun. That's number 10 on the list of Alabama's 15 best games of the 21st century. If you agree or disagree with our takes, please sound off in the comments. We'll come talk to you in there. And you can find Beat Everyone on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Matt Scalisi, Beat Everyone producer. Thanks as always. And our thanks to special guest and Alabama legend, Brodie Croyle, one of the reasons we're even sitting here talking about this game right here. So that's really cool that he did that. I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com. Thank you all, and we will see you next time.